A young girl named Emily lived in the quiet and peaceful small town of Millfield, nestled in the heart of the countryside. She was an inquisitive and adventurous child, always eager to explore and discover new things. She spent most of her days playing in the woods behind her house, climbing trees, and chasing butterflies. One summer day, wandering through the woods, she stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It was a dilapidated, two-story Victorian home with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It stood alone, surrounded by overgrown weeds and brambles, and it seemed to have been abandoned for many years. Despite her parents warning her to stay away from the woods, Emily was too curious to ignore the abandoned house. She approached the house and peered through one of the broken windows, her heart racing with excitement. Inside, Emily saw what appeared to be an old laboratory filled with strange equipment and chemicals. She couldn't believe her luck. She had always been fascinated by science and technology, and this was her chance to explore a real lab. Without hesitation, Emily climbed through the window and began exploring the house. She walked through the dusty halls, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Emily saw cobwebs hanging from the ceiling, a thick layer of dust covered the furniture. As she walked, she heard strange noises from the basement. It was like something was moving there. Intrigued, Emily made her way down the creaky stairs and found a locked door. Without a second thought, she unlocked the door with her hairpin and entered the room. In the room, her eyes were immediately drawn to a large glass container in the center. Inside the container, a strange, glowing substance pulsed and emitted a soft, eerie light. It seemed to call out to her, inviting her to come closer. Without hesitation, Emily stepped forward, her curiosity overwhelming her caution. As she reached out to touch the glowing substance, she couldn't help but notice that the container was covered in warning labels, with words such as danger and radioactive written in bold, red letters. Finally, her curiosity got the best, and she touched the substance. As soon as her fingers made contact with the glowing substance, she felt a burning sensation. She pulled her hand back and let out a scream of pain. The substance was hot, and her fingers were blistered and red. She looked at her hand in shock and dismay. "What did you do?" a voice echoed through the room. Startled, Emily turned to see a figure standing in the corner of the room. The figure stepped forward, revealing himself as the mad scientist experimenting with a dangerous and unknown substance. "You shouldn't have touched that," the scientist scolded. "That could have killed you." "I'm sorry," Emily stammered, "I didn't know." The scientist let out a sigh and shook his head. "It's too late now. You've been exposed, and there's no going back." "What do you mean? What's going to happen to me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with fear. The scientist hesitated for a moment before replying, "I'm not sure. This substance is unlike anything I've ever seen. It could have any number of effects on the human body." "But why did you have it? Why were you experimenting with something so dangerous?" Emily asked, tears welling up in her eyes. The scientist's expression softened, and he looked at her with a hint of remorse. "I was searching for a way to cure my illness. I thought this substance might be the answer, but I never intended to harm anyone else." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. The scientist had put her life in danger for his health. She looked at him with disgust and anger. "You're a monster," she spat. The scientist's expression hardened, and he stepped forward. "I may be a monster, but at least I'm trying to make a difference. What have you ever done for anyone?" Emily was at a loss for words. She couldn't think of anything to say. The scientist was correct. She had never done anything to make a difference in the world. She was just a curious child who had stumbled upon something she couldn't handle. "Please, let me go," Emily begged. "I want to go home." The scientist let out a maniacal laugh. "You'll never be able to leave. You're mine now, Emily. Together, we'll unlock the secrets of this substance and create a new world. A world where I'm in charge." Emily knew she had to escape. She pulled away from the scientist with all her might and ran towards the door. She banged on the door, screaming for help, but no one came. just as Emily was about to give up hope, she heard a faint voice calling her name. At first, she thought she imagined it, but the voice grew louder and more insistent. "Emily, where are you?" It was her older brother, Jack. She let out a cry of relief and banged on the door with renewed vigor. "Jack! I'm in here. Please, hurry." She heard him trying to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Hold on, Emily. I'm trying to break the lock," Jack shouted. She could hear him grunting and cursing as he tried to force the door open. She prayed that he would be able to break the lock before it was too late. Finally, with a loud crack, the lock broke, and the door burst open. Jack rushed in and scooped her up in his arms. "Oh, thank God. I thought I'd lost you," he said, holding her tightly. "I thought I'd lost you too," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Jack asked, his voice filled with anger. "It was a mad scientist. He was experimenting with some dangerous substance, and he trapped me here," Emily explained, still shaking with fear. "We have to get you to a hospital," Jack said, picking her up and carrying her out of the house. As they walked out of the house, Jack turned to her and asked, "How did you even find this place, Em? I've been looking for you everywhere." "I found it by accident. I was just exploring the woods," Emily replied, still in shock. "You know what Mom and Dad said about the woods. You shouldn't have gone there alone," Jack scolded, but his voice was concerned. I know. I'm sorry, Jack," Emily apologized, feeling guilty. "It's all right, you're safe now." "That's all that matters," Jack reassured her, hugging her. Emily was rushed to the hospital, where she was treated for burns and injuries. Her parents were by her side, relieved to see her, and hugged her tightly. They thanked Jack for saving her and were grateful that she was alive. The doctors examined her and found that she had suffered second-degree burns on her hand and minor injuries on her legs. They treated her wounds and gave her something to ease the pain. The mad scientist was arrested and sent to a mental institution. He was charged with kidnapping, assault, and reckless endangerment. The police searched his laboratory and found evidence of his experiments. They also found out that he had been experimenting with a dangerous and unknown substance. But even though she was safe, Emily could never forget the horrors she faced in that old, abandoned house. Years later, she still had nightmares about the mad scientist and the glowing substance. Emily often wondered what would have happened if her brother hadn't found her in time. She knew that the scientist's ultimate goal was to create a new world where he was in charge, a world that could only exist in the realm of nightmares. From that day on, she never returned to the woods behind her house or any abandoned building. She knew the monsters were not just in stories and movies, they were real and waiting for their next victim. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mad scientist was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his chance to strike again. She avoided any place that reminded her of that fateful day and stayed close to her family and friends. She never went anywhere alone, and she always kept an eye out for anything suspicious. She was determined never to let anyone harm her or her loved ones again. As the years went by, she tried to move on with her life, but the memories of that day never left her. She would often talk to her therapist about her experience and her fears. She would also talk to her family and friends. They would reassure her that she was safe now and that the mad scientist was locked up in an institution where he couldn't harm anyone else. Despite the support of her loved ones, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the mad scientist was still out there, waiting for his chance to strike again. However, she knew she had to be strong and brave, and she was determined never to be a victim again. Thanks for watching. Like or subscribe for more content like this.